This video provides background on changes to laws governing the Professional Negotiations Act and teacher tenure in Kansas. The KASB Legislative Committee has asked for help from our members to decide if these are priority issues for the upcoming legislative session.
About a couple of issues that we're asking school board members to discuss that are going to be part of the KASB Legislative Committee report and likely to be an important issue at this year's delegate assembly for the association and in next year's legislative session. Those two issues are professional negotiations with teachers and teacher due process. Are positions that go back to probably the 1970s or 80s when the Kansas legislature first passed these laws. At that time, teachers were successful in getting legislation passed that provided certain rights that hadn't been there in the past. KASB was not really supportive of those changes at the time. We've never changed our position since then, but in many years we have not made it a priority. In other words, even though we have a position that might support changes in tenure or changes in negotiations, we've not received indication from our membership that it was something they wanted us to actively pursue. Now, what makes this a little different is that every year our delegate assembly has the opportunity to pass one-year resolutions, which really become the priority document for that year. Last year, you may remember that the delegate assembly passed a resolution called First in Education, the Kansas Way, that set priorities for KASB in a number of different areas. Within that, the only thing that touched on the areas we're speaking about today was a position that would have moved teacher evaluation procedures outside of what had to be negotiated. However, last year, the Kansas Legislative Committee introduced a bill that would have made much more significant changes in the teacher negotiations process. We worked with the committee to get a bill that was closely aligned with what our policies are, even though we hadn't introduced the bill in the first place. Well, that bill ultimately didn't pass. Think about what we want our positions to be in these two areas, and then how actively should KASB try to make these changes, and how actively will our local boards work with us to accomplish the same thing. Really, the biggest difference is that KASB's position is that the list of things you have to negotiate would be much shorter. Right. It would really come down to saying you have to negotiate over salary and compensation, how much you pay teachers, and how long they have to work to get paid. Now, one of the things that they're proposing is language that would make clear that you would not have to negotiate how the working day is divided. You wouldn't have to negotiate if you want to go from a 6-period day to a 7-period day or vice versa. Under current law, you do have to do that. So what KASB's proposal from our committee is, which we think is very similar to what our long-time policy is, would be to shrink that list. If we were successful in changing this law, all of those other permissive areas you could take out of the contract. So, for example, wearing apparel that you talk about, dress code sometimes called. If this law would pass, as our current position is, you would be able to adopt. You'd be able to take that out, adopt a totally new provision. However, the thing to keep in mind is if your board and your teachers wanted to keep that language or want to continue to talk about other things, you could. Well, let's talk about the other issue that did not come up last year but has been an issue in the past, and that is the current state of the law regarding teacher due process rights or tenure.
Sure.
What we're suggesting in our policy and in the priority that we would assign here is that the law be changed to clarify that the board should be the hearing officer, that they should make the initial decision on whether a teacher should continue to teach. The teacher would still have a right to appeal that, and frankly, in our policy, whether it was to hearing officer or to the court, I don't think we particularly care, but the idea would be that the board should be upheld if they acted with evidence, good cause, if they were not arbitrary or capricious. In other words, if they could show that they made a sound educational decision, the hearing officer shouldn't second-guess their decision. And that's really the change that we're talking about now, because under the current situation, a hearing officer does not have to find that the board acted arbitrarily or capriciously or whatever. The hearing officer can simply say, you know, if it were up to me, I think the teacher should give given a chance, stay on board, whatever it might be. So that's essentially the change that we're looking at. It would be to really go back to the status of about 20 years ago. All school superintendents and school board presidents are going to be receiving a letter with an electronic email and a survey where we're going to ask your board to kind of respond to some questions about this issue. Because what we've found in this area is we think probably most board members would like to have fewer things they have to negotiate, and most boards would prefer to have more flexibility in terms of being able to deal with tenured teachers if they think they should be removed. But both of these are very politically difficult issues. They're very controversial. Kansas NEA is a very influential organization. That's how they passed these laws in the first place. And they passed them because, I think it's fair to say, there were instances of boards being abusive in the past, or at least that was the perception that enough legislators had that they were able to pass these bills. The issue is that now the Kansas legislature, quite frankly, because of the changing political climate, may be more likely to make these changes. But even last year, what we learned was, although it was Republican leaders in the House that were interested in making changes in the negotiations law, what legislative leaders told us, even after the bill was changed to really reflect our position, what they said is, we're not hearing from any board members, we're not hearing from superintendents or school leaders, but we're hearing from a lot of teachers. So we're not hearing anybody supporting the change, we're hearing a lot of people opposing the change, regardless of what controversy they might create. And most important, we believe, are you then prepared to be an advocate? Is your board, are you as individual members, are you prepared to actively work for these bills? Are you prepared in open session with teachers and friends and family watching to say, we support these changes? Are you prepared to go to your legislators? Are you prepared to call your legislators and support such legislation? Are you prepared to come to Topeka and testify on why these changes would be important to your district? Because if you do believe that these are important changes, we have to talk about the reasons why. So it isn't simply seen as, well, you know, we're just interested in more power. We have to talk about what are the implications of these changes for improving education in our state.